As diplomatic momentum builds around the Gaza peace accord, world leaders intensify coordination to ensure its lasting success. U.S. President Trump announces his upcoming visit to Israel and Egypt, while French President Macron and regional leaders, including Egypt's President Sisi and Cyprus's Christodoulos, reaffirm commitment to reconstruction and regional stability. Join us on our special coverage on Qnews, where we tackle the latest developments.
الآن في شرم الشيخ بتجرى مفاوضات لإنهاء الحرب.
I may go there sometime toward the end of the week, maybe on Sunday.
لازم أسجل بتقدير واحترام شديد للرئيس الأمريكي ترامب على إرادته الحقيقية في إنهاء الحرب خلال جولة المفاوضات الحالية.
U.S. President Donald Trump has announced that Israeli detainees held in Gaza will begin returning, along with the recovery of about 28 bodies. Trump said the Gaza agreement would benefit Israel, the Middle East, and the world, expressing confidence in the durability of the ceasefire. Trump revealed plans to visit Israel to address the Knesset, then travel to Egypt for the official signing ceremony attended by several leaders. He also announced the creation of a peace council to oversee Gaza's reconstruction.
So they're getting them, and they're also getting the bodies, approximately 28 bodies.
The Élysée Palace has announced that French President Emmanuel Macron will travel to Egypt on Monday to support the implementation of President Trump's proposed peace agreement. During his visit, Macron will reaffirm France's commitment to the two-state solution as the foundation for the lasting regional stability. He is also set to hold talks with regional and international partners to coordinate the next steps concerning Gaza's future and the broader peace process aimed at consolidating security and reconstruction efforts.
Nous réaffirmons ici avec force que la liberté de savoir, de penser, est une condition de notre avenir. Au fond, votre
Egypt's Foreign Minister Badr Abdel-Ati and U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio have held a phone call discussing regional developments and the progress in ending the Gaza war. The two reviewed preparations for the upcoming Sharm el-Sheikh summit, co-chaired by the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi and the U.S. President Donald Trump. Rubio described the summit as a historic milestone and praised Egypt's pivotal leadership in achieving the peace accord. Abdel-Ati emphasized the importance of implementing the agreement stages and reaffirmed Egypt's commitment to advancing the two-state solution as the path to lasting regional peace. President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi reaffirms Egypt's unwavering commitment to peace, aid delivery, and full implementation of the Sharm el-Sheikh agreement. The European Union has affirmed its readiness to contribute implementing the comprehensive plan aimed at ending the Gaza war, calling on all parties to uphold the ceasefire agreement. The EU emphasised the need for full adherence to ensure the lasting truce, the release of detainees and the unhindered flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza. It also reiterated its commitment to supporting efforts of Gaza Strip's stabilization and reconstruction in coordination with international partners and relevant organizations. For further analysis, we're joined from Washington, D.C. by the Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation, Brent Sadler. Thank you, sir, for joining us here on Q News.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start off by asking, from a U.S. policy standpoint, how does President Trump's handling of the Gaza agreement so far reflect a shift when it comes to Washington's broader Middle East strategy?
Good question. I think U.S. interests remain unchanged. As a matter of fact, and I think one of the objectives is not ensuring that Hamas is not able to reconstitute itself in Gaza and to turn a page for a better future for the Palestinians and to include development of the Gaza Strip, most notably. I would say that the other standout feature of President Trump's approach, again, in very characteristic form, it's unconventional, but it really is embracing the changed reality of the last year as Hezbollah has been largely neutered militarily by the Israeli forces. Syria is now in a potentially favorable government or potentially could have a new favorable relationship with Israel. And Iran has also been set back significantly, the benefactor and the supplier of much of the finance and the weapons that find their way into groups like Hamas and that have been the source of much bloodshed in the past and failed peace treaties or peace deals. So the plan is embrace this reality. I think it's also key to note that it doesn't rely on Hamas agreeing to it for it to proceed. We have countries that are trusted by Israel now in the Abraham Accords that are willing to participate actively in the rebuilding of a better Palestinian presence or Palestinian state in Gaza.
But do you think that President Trump also sees that there is a need to actually also pressure the Israelis into, the negotiating table and finding an end to this as well? Because they've stalled for quite a while, the negotiations as well.
Well, I think it's the absence of meaningful pressure by Middle Eastern countries and Western European countries on Hamas that has really been more to blame for not getting to a mutually agreeable
but is it though? I mean,
sustainable
almost every ceasefire negotiation was blown up by the Israeli side, last of which was the one in Qatar.
One could say the same thing for Hamas and changing the terms and also taking actions. Clearly, that attack in Qatar has been roundly criticized, and agreements have been put in place with the United States and Qatar to ensure that doesn't happen again. It's not to say that Israelis are a perfect ally, but they certainly are trusted and have common interest with the United States. And so, on the balance, it's Hamas that's been more of a failing point in past deals in the past. And Iran's hand is always in the background.
Yeah, I'm sure that's how the Americans see it, but that's not necessarily what's actually happening. But given Trump's upcoming visit to Israel and Egypt, what diplomatic or symbolic goals might the U.S. administration be pursuing when it comes to the direct engagement, given the set of things that you just said about, getting rid of a number of other factors that are imposing on the ceasefire?
Well, I mean, I think if we're talking about the participation of other Middle Eastern countries in trying to help rebuild a better situation and future for the Palestinian people in Gaza and perhaps eventually in the West Bank, that's a fundamental shift. Israel certainly didn't trust them, and many of those same countries were not recognizing Israel's right to exist. That's changed in a fundamental way with the Abraham Accords. And so it's really a lack of imagination as to how far this can go towards a better future for the Palestinian people. And again, I think it's echoed in the agreement for making Gaza a terror-free zone or radical-free zone, changing the mindset to a positive future in the minds of the Palestinian people in Gaza, not held back by this kind of fixation on violence and constant
But
war
that's a
fighting
very
by
unfair
groups like
assessment, because
Hamas.
they're the ones who have had violence as well being inflicted on them in the last 2 years, haven't they? I mean, it's just
Well, to be honest, October 7th was orchestrated by Hamas. It was brutal. It was
yes, we can talk about
violations
October
by
7th being
all kind of
Hamas and all of
standards of
that,
warfare.
but it's still like the civilians themselves living in Gaza have had violence inflicted on them as well.
Yes, by Hamas, of course.
No, by the Israelis, by the IDF.
Well, it's important to note that Israel vacated and they even forcefully removed their settlers that were in Gaza for many decades. And so it really was Hamas that was governing. And the vast majority of that violence on a day-to-day basis, certainly in the years leading up to October 7th, 2023, was inflicted by themselves, led by Hamas and other gangster-type organizations
I think the
in Gaza.
International Court of Justice disagrees with that statement right there. I mean,
Well, they have very little credibility.
well, again, anyone that disagrees with Israel apparently has very little credibility. But let's talk about the peace negotiations. What does the creation of a peace council suggest about the U.S. approach to post-war reconstruction as well as long-term governance in Gaza?
Well, it's like a governance board. So there'll be various parties that'll be present on that, to include hopefully future responsible parties from Gaza that are made up of Palestinians representing the better interest of the Palestinian people. And that board will make sure that rather than a return to past where you have a commitment to violence rather than development is avoided. And that includes in the education system. The UN has failed miserably in trying to put forward a path better for the Palestinians.
In your opinion, every international organization has failed and
in my opinion,
are not credible
no, that's
sources?
not necessarily true. Just in the case of the Palestinians. In this case, I would say the UN has failed miserably.
So I'm not sure what to ask there. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just that anyone that defies the Israelis or says anything against the Israeli actions is not a credible source, or support Hamas, or support violence and all of that. How does that function in terms of finding a solution towards peace if we're only going to victim blame the civilians who are being killed or have been killed for the last 2 years?
To be clear, that's not what my point is. It's certainly the position of the United States government's been for some time that the UN agency there in Gaza had been undermined by agents of Hamas. And it's been reported numerous times that they, rather than acting as neutral or agents of the UN, they've been acting as members of Hamas. And that's been acknowledged.
That has been
that's what I'm talking
debunked
about.
by the UN itself. It's just not a fact.
Actually, I would disagree with that. But
I'm sure
the
you
point
do,
of the
but
matter
it's
is,
not a fact.
I would say it is a fact. But the point of the matter is the way in which the peace or the rebuilding is structured is to prevent a return to what we've seen so often in the past for violent groups to take over and to hijack what could be the use of resources to build a more prosperous, peaceful society in Gaza for the Palestinians. And that's the focus. It's not about Hamas's rights and Hamas's propaganda.
I wasn't discussing Hamas's rights. I was talking about the
that.
average Palestinian. They will need reconstruction efforts. They will need to build hospitals, homes, schools. It will take years, and they will need places to shelter. This is what I was asking about. The average Palestinian civilian living in the Gaza Strip.
And they certainly do, I think, want to have benefits from that. The problem is the billions of dollars that had been given to the Palestinians, led by Hamas since 2008, was being put into building military infrastructure, not economic development.
I understand your point there, that this is, in your point of view, what used to happen. But we're looking forward now. After this peace accord in Sharm el-Sheikh, the expectations are, how will the U.S., along with international partners, facilitate the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip?
Well, again, it comes down to trust. The Palestinians, people there, I think the impression of the suspicion of groups like Hamas is pretty high, and they have to have some group that they trust and they rely on. And I think that's where there's a possible fundamental shift through the Abraham Accords. Groups in Middle Eastern countries that have been supporters of the Palestinians in the past and still are also going to be involved in the rebuilding. I think that's important for the Palestinians, that trusted agents are coming in to help oversee this. But they're also trusted, importantly, by the neighbor in Israel. That's a fundamental shift that's enabled by the Abraham Accords. And again, turning a page on a more positive future.
But the 20-point plan does not necessarily have anything to do with that. It's about phase 1, phase 2, and so forth when it comes to the peace. That's what I really want to focus on. How do you see the negotiation process happening?
Well, I mean, the next 2 or 3 days are going to be very turbulent, because past his prologue, the turnover of all the remaining living hostages, 20 of them, in exchange for, quite a number of Palestinians that are in prison, and many of them that have Israeli blood on their hands. That requires a high level of trust on the part of the Israelis that it's not going to enable a return. So very, very tenuous right now as to whether or not we get to a point where Hamas willingly puts down its weapons, releases the hostages, and progresses to a more positive future. One in which, quite frankly, in the plan does not include Hamas. You're
very focused on
in
Hamas
Gaza.
still, and Palestinians having blood on their hands, but we're hearing very little on the idea of accountability as well for the blood on Israeli hands of Palestinians.
Well, I'd like to know the specific cases we're talking on that.
So it's
and
well
again,
documented. It's been documented for the last 2 years.
Again, when you have combat since October 8th, the day after the atrocious attacks on innocents, over 1,000 killed in southern Israel, you have a war, and war has certain bounds and laws that are followed.
Well, yeah.
I would have to say that's
I
worth
understand your point. We're just
but
never going to reach a point of agreement on that point. But if we could talk a bit more about the Sharm el-Sheikh agreements, and we'll discuss this later on about what's happening in Gaza. But unfortunately, we're out of time. That was Brent Sadler from Washington, D.C., the Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us here on Qnews. Egypt's President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi has received a phone call from the Cypriot President Nikos Christodoulos discussing regional developments, notably the Sharm el-Sheikh agreement to end the Gaza war. The Cypriot president welcomed the accord and praised Egypt's decisive role and the personal efforts of President el-Sisi. President el-Sisi stressed full implementation, humanitarian access and reconstruction, emphasizing Egypt's coordination with Qatar and the US. He invited Christodoulos to Egypt's peace celebration and proposed an international recovery conference. The two leaders also discussed strengthening Egypt-Cyprus cooperation in trade, tourism, and investment. Egyptian Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli has emphasized that the Palestinian cause will not be abandoned under any pressure, and the forced displacement of Palestinians will not be tolerated. He reaffirmed Egypt's consistent stance since the onset of the Gaza crisis, despite campaigns of doubt and misrepresentation. Madbouli praised the U.S. President Donald Trump's efforts alongside international partners in facilitating the Gaza agreement. He also highlighted widespread international recognition of Egypt's pivotal role in securing the ceasefire and supporting a framework of lasting peace in the region. Egypt continues to send large-scale humanitarian aid to Gaza without interruption, leading efforts to break the famine through sustained convoys carrying food, clean water, medical supplies, and vital fuel for hospitals. Hundreds of Egyptian trucks have entered the Gaza Strip via the coastal border routes, including the major convoy along Al-Rashid Street. That comes as the Egyptian Relief Committee has so far delivered over 500,000 food parcels. Gaza residents expressed deep appreciation for Egypt's steadfast support and its firm stance against displacement. The Egyptian Committee for the Relief of the People of Gaza announced its active contribution to supporting the return of displaced Palestinians to northern Gaza. This effort involved the deployment of 100 trucks to transport returnees from various areas, with a priority given to the elderly, women, and children. The committee reaffirmed its commitment to stand by Gaza's residents through all stages of resilience and return. Egypt's decisive mediation and logistical leadership marks the first tangible steps towards Gaza's post-recovery.
Since the ceasefire came into effect, hundreds of aid trucks laden with food, medicine, and humanitarian supplies have entered Gaza through the Rafah border crossing, with daily convoys coordinated under United Nations oversight. These sources emphasize that Egypt's logistical contributions have played a central role in delivering relief to the Gaza Strip beleaguered population. Reports confirm that parts of Gaza have begun receiving intermittent power restored under the truce's provisions, allowing limited electricity to vital facilities and households. The re-energizing of the network is a key indicator of the agreement's early impact on civilian life. That comes as thousands of displaced Gazans have begun returning to their home neighborhoods in the north, walking across reopened corridors as security is maintained under the ceasefire framework. The return flows are described as cautious and gradual, with preliminary assessments underway of damages to infrastructure and housing. Egypt has been credited for its pivotal mediating role in brokering the ceasefire and supervising the early operational phase. That comes as Cairo is the primary regional enabler of the agreement, as Egyptian diplomatic, security, and logistical assets were indispensable to achieving consensus and facilitating implementation.
For further analysis, we're joined from Cairo by the expert in international relations at Al Ahram, Dr. Ahmed Saeed Ahmed. Thank you, sir, for joining us here on Q News. Sir, firstly, let's start off by asking you, how would you assess Egypt's role in the Sharm el-Sheikh agreement, especially in terms of the diplomatic strategy as well as long-term regional influence that has been exerted?
Of course, Egypt's role in reaching the Sharm el-Sheikh agreement regarding Gaza is a pivotal and very important one. Since the beginning, Egypt took measures in all levels simultaneously and completely, and this included the security measures. And our priority was stopping the Palestinian bloodshed and the suffering, the humanitarian suffering. So Egypt tried to improve the security measures while negotiating with Qatar and the US and to gather international support to end the war. And Egypt succeeded in reaching two agreements in November 2023 and one in last January, both of which Israel broke. But despite all of this and all the obstacles made by Israel, Egypt's efforts didn't stop even for a second. And Egypt has great experience with the security institutions to deal and face the obstacles in negotiations and to defeat the stalemate. So Egypt's role in the latest negotiations was appreciated internationally, and without Egypt's efforts, the many parties wouldn't have been able to reach this agreement, and all actually confessed this, and the US as well. And the Egyptian role led to gathering support, especially from Western and European countries, to pressure in order to end the war. All of this were due to Egypt's role. They changed the European and Western stance and trying to pressure Israel. And of course, many European countries now recognize Palestine. All of this were due to Egypt's role and efforts. This is evidence that Egypt supports Palestinians always, especially the right for independent state.
Okay, President Sisi emphasized the importance of the full implementation and humanitarian access into Gaza. What challenges do you foresee when it comes to ensuring these commitments are upheld, especially in the Gaza Strip?
The president emphasized the importance of implementing the Sharm el-Sheikh agreement fully, especially its first stage and the successive ones, which of course in my opinion will be harder. There are numerous challenges that I expect might happen, especially from the Israeli side and even from the Palestinian faction side, because we know Netanyahu didn't want to reach such an agreement. He wanted another scenario, which is the displacement and the full occupation of Gaza. But due to the American pressure and Trump's pressure, Netanyahu had to accept this agreement. But it's expected that he might stall or make hindrances to stop or hinder the second or third phase, especially regarding the Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. The new plan necessitates a withdrawal. And of course, the disarmament of Hamas, this is of course a challenge to the Palestinian factions, the disarmament. But in my own opinion, the Egyptians' efforts will continue with the partners to overcome such obstacles, especially the disarmament of factions. And the plan necessitates such disarmament and to give the weapons to an independent committee, whether Egyptian or Arab. They won't give the weapons to Israel. Egypt is seeking to not give Netanyahu or his governments any excuses to violate or hinder the agreement. The summit in Sharm el-Sheikh, attended by Trump and some world leaders, tries to provide international guarantees to monitor the agreement and its implementation and to face any expected challenges that might happen during the next period.
So how do you think, or how do you see Egypt's coordination with Qatar and the US? How can this enhance the chances for a lasting peace in Gaza? And are there any concerns about the alignment of these powers' interests?
My opinion, I think since the beginning Egypt it was trying to coordinate with all parties in Qatar and the US to improve the negotiations and reach a deal and maintain the deal. I think Trump said that he expects that the deal will withstand. The atmosphere is different from before. There is an international regional cohesion. The US won this deal and Egypt is exerting efforts internationally. Like
Dr.
Turkey
Ahmed, your point there is clear, but I apologize, we're out of time. That was Dr. Ahmed Said Ahmed from Cairo, the expert in international relations at Al Ahram. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us, and thank you for your insights. This brings us to the end of our special coverage for now. Don't forget to follow Q News on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at Q News EGY to stay informed. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more.